in the early years, the conversations around the threat of Al-Shabaab had a particular tinge that has changed now, so that there isn't a public discourse now about how security is being managed. We've had a gradual removal of the involvement, the engagement with insecurity from public debate. So what instead we have is security leaders telling us we have dealt with the problem and you don't have to worry about it anymore. We feel that there needs to be more transparency about these issues. We feel we need to be told in which ways, what security threats we face in the first place. And how the states have gone about dealing with those threats, and whether or not the way in which they deal with those threats ensures the continuing promotion of human rights. So I call on more transparency, including in the arrangements that our governments have with their Western or global North promoters. The government of Kenya has just come from a state visit in the United States, where we saw that they signed an additional set of agreements on security cooperation. The content of those agreements needs to be more deliberately projected to the public, not as well as the actual strategies that are represented by that security cooperation. Because if we don't have public scrutiny, we can't be sure that what we are signing up for in the end represents our common good. Again, thank you very much, all the organizers, and as the Open Society, we are very, very privileged to be part of the conversation this morning. Asanteni sana.
Your concept documents, if I may refer you to page 3, why human rights matter for counterterrorism. You know, we're saying, first of all, it's to build public trust and legitimacy. We want the public to be with us. This is not something that is driven by the states only. Countering terrorism, preventing and countering violent extremism should be an initiative of everyone, the entire community. We call it the whole of society approach. So when we ensure human rights are promoted while countering terrorism, we build the public trust. It's also about addressing the root causes of conflict. It's not just about going in, killing, and moving forward, but understanding why exactly do we have this problem, you know? So when we do that, then we are able to better understand why it's even happening in the first place. Strengthening the social contract, as we all understand, you know, governance and such kinds of related issues. By promoting human rights, we strengthen the social contract. Promoting sustainable development. So when we do that, then we are able to better understand why it's even happening. And when we ensure that security is guaranteed and it is ingrained within communities, then we will be able to ensure that there is sustainable development. Thank you so much, Mr. Kigoro, for reminding us of those key issues. And at this point in time, we'd like to hear from our continental partner, our continental body, the Africa Union. We just had some of our partners who have worked with the Africa Union, and they're here. But we have Mr. Christopher Kayoshe, who deals with these issues almost on a daily basis at his station in Ethiopia, to talk to us, to give us some welcoming remarks, and also to share with us what he thinks as civil society we can do in partnering with the African Union to drive this agenda forward. Mr. Christopher Kayoshe is originally from Rwanda, but as I've said, he's based in Ethiopia working with the African Union. A warm welcome, please, as he comes forward to give his welcoming remarks. Mr. Kayoshe, please.
Your Excellency, dear participants and delegates for this conference, for me this is a very important time to address this challenge of terrorism on the continent. Currently, the state of play on the continent is that out of the 5 regions of the continent, each region is affected. Before, terrorism was in one part of the continent, but now almost all 5 regions, there's presence of terrorism. And traditional terrorism was largely acts of either blowing up a building or hijacking an aircraft. But increasingly, we are seeing terrorists occupying space, dominating territories, and also undermining the safety and security of citizens. And I think the response, the hard security response, is not working anymore. We need to rethink the responses. One of which is to not deal with the downstream issues, but rather address the upstream issues and see what causes actually terrorists. What makes somebody become a terrorist? By the time bombs go off, work would have been done many years ago. That what we see as a bomb going off is just a fruit of terrorism of a long. To me, I think we should look at education. This year is a year of a theme for the continent is education. I think we should look at peace education. That should be one of our entry point. And also there should be a strong linkage between civil society and the state through what we call the Livingstone formula, in which the continent has the ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council, which links the continent and its citizens. That's a major area that I think we should strengthen, and I think this kind of a meeting is very, very important to ensure that there's programming that responds direct to the issues in schools, interfaith dialogue, and also to ensure there is we have seen there's a major indicator that as our countries decline in economic and employment, also there is a correlation between terrorism. So maybe the response should be largely to deal with economic issues, to ensure there is equity, and also to ensure that we have employment measures instead of having the youth going out of the continent. Maybe we should look that side, and I think civil society is the main component here. Of course, the continent also has what we call the Common African Defense and Security Policy. One of its major tenets is that Africa's security is indivisible. One state's security cannot be separated from the other. When we see instability in one member state, in some cases, you have a problem in one country, within 72 hours, you see a shockwaves in another country. So we are in this together. And I think civil society is the right place to ensure that actual responses are at the heart of the communities and civil society, rather than being a state-centric element whereby hard security is being used. We should use soft responses, long-term, thought-through responses. I thank you very much.
I would like now to move on. And she just corrected me. The African Commission is one of the 10 arms of the African Union. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights is our premier continental institution that handles matters to do with human rights. They've done brilliant work over the years. Last year, I believe, I don't know if Eva is here, we did the guidelines on enforced disappearances. We were part of that team. So very good work that's happening. And allow me now to welcome one of the commissioners, Dr. Litha Musiemi, who came all the way from Johannesburg to be with us here. And we appreciate her presence. Welcome for her as she comes forward to give us her welcoming remarks and to tell us a few things from the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Karibu, madam.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, our moderator. Your Excellency, the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, National Commission on Human and People's Rights, and Dr. Roslyn and from the National Counterterrorism Center, Professor Ben So, the UN Special Rapporteur, colleagues, heads of civil society organizations, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. I bring you warm greetings from the African Commission for Human and People's Rights, and particularly from the chairperson, Honorable Remingo Ilumbu, and all the commissioners in Banjul. I am delighted in Nairobi, the Green City in the Sun at the opening ceremony of the Human Rights and Social Justice Conference of 2024, whose theme is Human Rights and Counter-Terrorism, a timely and critically important moment for the fight against terrorism. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, today the world is confronted by many global threats, such as climate and terrorism, which our host country has had a fair share of both. Recently, Kenya witnessed one of the worst climate disasters, and I would like to start by conveying the solidarity from the African Commission on Human and People's Rights to the government and people of Kenya who lost family members, were displaced, and lost property in the recent floods. Turning back to the terrorism threat, which date back to the Norfolk Hotel attack in the 70s, climaxed in the 90s during the American Embassy attack, later the Westgate and the Desvit attack in the last decade, Kenya has attested to this global threat. We gather here as the global landscape continues to grapple with the due imperatives of ensuring security and protecting fundamental human rights. This delicate balance is nowhere more urgent than in the realm of counterterrorism. Ladies and gentlemen, the Commission at the African Human and People's Rights is acutely aware of the challenges that terrorism poses to security, peace, and human rights. Terrorism is an affront of the core values we cherish. It undermines life itself, destabilizes families and the society, and inflicts unspeakable suffering on innocent individuals. Let me start by saying that terrorism has no borders, neither are there safe havens, and so we are all vulnerable at our homes, at the workplace, in the shopping malls, at bus stops, airports, and underwater. The September 11 attack on the United States confirmed that this threat is not only faced by some poor countries somewhere, but faces all countries everywhere. I can demonstrate this very quickly because it happened when the Nairobi attack in 1998 happened. I was in my house in Kenya and watched the drama on TV as I was not working. I was on maternity leave, and my office was in Pioneer House, which was just next to the American Embassy. And so I felt very safe to be at home. And as Kenya struggled with trying to get people out of the embassy to the Kenyatta National Hospital, we all wept, and they had our solidarity. However, 2 years later, I happened to be in New York, working and feeling very safe. And one morning on my way to Manhattan to my office, at the train station of the World Trade Center, the September 11 accident happened, the attack happened. I was right there at the train station, and as I was running to save my own life, at one moment I forgot whether I was in America or whether I was in Kenya. And the moral of this story is that terrorism can attack you when you are visiting, when you are at home. It can attack you when you are shopping. It can attack you when you feel very safe. Because in my case, I thought America was very safe for me at that time. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a story for another day. But let me continue by saying that we need to work hard to combat both terrorism and also counter-terrorism. While every effort should be not spared in combating this menace, our response to terrorism should also be the very principles we seek to defend. Allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to say that I'll be looking at 3 issues during this conference. I'll mention them now, but I'll be dealing with them tomorrow during my presentation. The first one is the need to promote human rights and the rule of law in countering terrorism. The second one is that the fight against terrorism must be grounded in the rule of law. And the third one is that human rights are universal, inalienable, and indivisible. And so we shall be looking at this tomorrow in detail. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellency, we have witnessed, unfortunately, numerous instances where counter-terrorism measures have led to arbitrary detentions, extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, torture, repression of press freedoms, and holding of human rights defenders. These actions are not morally reprehensible and in breach of the obligations assumed by state parties under the AU Charter for Human Rights. They fuel grievances, undermine legitimate governance, and often provide fertile ground for further radicalization and violence. Effective counterterrorism is rooted in respect for human rights, ensuring that security measures do not become a source of further conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, the African continent has a robust framework for human rights protection. The Charter, along with other various regional instruments, provide comprehensive guidelines for upholding human rights. Additionally, international instruments such as the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, and the United Nations Global Counterterrorism Strategy outline the obligations of states in protecting human rights while combating terrorism. State parties to the African Charter must ensure that all counterterrorism measures comply with these regional and international standards. This compliance is not only a legal obligation, but also a practical necessity. Upholding human rights in counterterrorism enhances the legitimacy of state actions and fosters cooperation with communities. For it is communities, after all, that are often the first line of defense against radicalization. When states respect human rights, they build trust and partnership with their citizens, which is essential for effective counterterrorism. Ladies and gentlemen, state parties must be vigilant to ensure that counterterrorism laws and policies are not wielded as tools of repression. This requires clear, precise definitions of terrorism that do not encompass legitimate activities such as peaceful protests and political opposition. It also necessitates robust legal safeguards to protect individuals from arbitrary detention and other abuses. Ladies and gentlemen, that notwithstanding, we know that terrorism has become an industry. It is an industry with supply and demand actors, some of whom are supposed to be part of the solution. And this begs the question. At the African Commission for Human and People's Rights, we consistently emphasize that all individuals, including those accused of the most heinous crimes, are entitled to the protection of their fundamental rights. This includes the right to legal representation, the right to be informed of charges, and the right to prompt and fair trial by an independent and impartial tribunal. Torture and ill treatment in particular are absolutely prohibited under both the regional and international law. The prohibition of torture is a preemptory norm of international law, meaning it cannot be derogated under any circumstances, including counterterrorism. State parties must ensure that their counterterrorism practices do not involve torture or other forms of ill treatment, and that allegations of such abuses are promptly and throughout investigated. Ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, we are confident we are confronted with persistent and evolving threats. we must do all that is under our powers to make sure that we are committed to the human rights and rule of law of our countries. Our actions must reflect values enshrined in the African Union Charter and other regional and international institutions. I call upon all state parties to the African Charter to affirm their commitment to these principles. Let us ensure that our counterterrorism measures are not effective in only protecting security, but also in upholding the dignity and rights of all individuals. By doing so, we will strengthen our societies, build trust with our citizens, and create a resilient front against the forces of terror. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights stands ready to support you in this endeavor. Together, let us forge a path that honors our shared humanity and our collective commitment to justice, peace, and human dignity. I thank you.
Too much trouble, we can get your speech, and then we can make copies for participants, those who may want to read and understand what has just been said here in details. So thank you so much. Without further ado, I would like to welcome the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. They mainly work on preventing and countering violent extremism. Just to clarify that, not directly counterterrorism, preventing and countering violent extremism. And they've been working very well with strategy on preventing and countering violent extremism in Kenya. They went ahead to devolve those strategies to the sub-national, that is at the county level. As we speak, all the 47 counties presently have strategies to prevent and counter violent extremism. Dr. Nyawira has been at the core of that work, and she continues to work with different actors in the efforts to ensure the country is safe by preventing and countering violent extremism. Karibu, Daktari, so that you can give us your welcoming remarks. A warm welcome, please. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, Right Honorable Raila Odinga, the Professor Benso, the UN Special Rapporteur from the African Union, Dr. Litha Christopher Kayoshe, my colleagues, practitioners in the prevention and countering of violent extremism space. I stand before you this morning with a background on human rights and humanitarian law, just to say that to a human rights practitioner audience, accrue to all of us as human beings, and we are equal, as we all know from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but sometimes the question begs, are we equal? We all know that we are equal, but we come in a variety of groups influenced by genetics and environment. We grow up in varied spaces with different climate and socio-cultural norms. We carry bias with narrow worldviews that fail to recognize the diversity of everyone, and we want to fit everyone into a local frame. And therefore, we struggle with equality and inequality and equity in the sharing of power and resources. Conflict has been second nature to man. Men and women have been adjudged as inherently selfish, wanting everything for ourselves. And the regime of human rights that we pride ourselves in today is actually premised on the bloodshed, especially of the two world wars, where Europe was a theater of massacre. But this does not preclude the previous wars and the blatant disregard of rights seen throughout the history of humanity. If I be narrowed down to terrorism, and to be specific, the kind of terrorism that has manifested, especially in our region in Africa in the last 3 decades, it is intertwined with intolerant ideologies that shape individuals within communities to hate those who are not part of the in-group. This hatred grows almost in a discernible pattern and leads to violence. In his book on the psychology of terrorism, Andrew Sick says that violent extremism is not simply about physical suffering, it's about making a psychological impact. It's about psychology, about the creation of a wider sense of terror, and partly about winning a psychological battle of hearts and minds. So inevitably, counterterrorism must also not just be in the physical space, but also have the psychological dimension to be effective. And ignoring the psychology of terrorism is to miss the crux of the problem. But let's have a discussion on the salient issues that when we think about terrorism and human rights, we need to boldly delve into the issues that we deal with. When human beings want to justify violence against others, the first thing they do is dehumanize. They dehumanize the people that they want to attack, while extolling themselves of being of a better pedigree. And these terrorists have done by using inanimate terminology to refer to others as pigs and dogs, so that to refer to what they consider the outgroup, so that if they are not human, then they have no right, especially they have no right to live, and therefore it is justifiable to kill them. Terrorists also do not care for human or humanitarian rights while carrying out their campaigns. The battlefield is very uneven. It gives undue advantage to them. They can target civilians with no regard to distinction or proportionality. They use human shields because they know that counter-terrorist actors, mostly being states abide by rules of humanitarian law. And this, in turn, gives a temptation to the counter-terrorist actors to repay in equal measure. Counter-terrorism can be motive. Terrorists do not just dehumanize their direct victims because their modus operandi is so unregulated, it's gruesome, it attacks savage counteraction. A soldier in battle seeing his compatriot and friend blown up in pieces or decapitated can experience temporary insanity and deep-seated trauma and hatred. The Mosaic concept of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is enlivened. This can be directed at the terrorists, of course, but also at others that may, by whatever kind of affiliation, innocent or otherwise, are perceived to be related to the terrorists. Terrorists also use intelligence to plan and execute their attacks, and in many jurisdictions, the technicalities of the crime of terrorism have not been appreciated. It is highly compartmentalized. One may plan but not execute the attack, yet he is privy to the entire plan. One may move explosives but not make the suicide best, yet he will know that in the process of moving explosives, they are for a nefarious purpose, most likely to blow up people. Proving both the mens rea and the actus reus can be an uphill task, and the evidential threshold of beyond reasonable doubt may sometimes seem unachievable, thus discouraging action within the criminal justice system. Terrorism is also very expensive. The hardware and the software of it, the cost of human lives, calls for alternative means. That said, it has been proven that abuse of human rights begets more violence and more abuse. It's a vicious cycle. It actually brings competition on the abusers to outdo each other. It spreads fear, increases hatred, overflows to the innocent and vulnerable, and causes more polarization and feeds into the narrative of terrorists. So what do we do then to ensure that we are not trying to match the violence of the terrorists, but are actually stopping the violence? We must seek to operate within constitutional criminal justice system, make laws that take cognizance of the challenges that come with prosecuting terrorism. In Kenya, for instance, the Prevention of Terrorism Act has been amended to take cognizance of the fact that investigating terrorism takes time, and arrests may have to be made prematurely to disrupt a planned attack. The law that provides that while suspects must be presented to court within 24 hours of arrest, the courts can grant delays of lawful detention upon request to allow for further investigations. It's also important to bring all agencies dealing with terrorism together to ensure that they ride on each other's strength in defending and disrupting terrorist acts. And Kenya has done very well on this multi-agency approach. But most importantly, and this is what we do for our organization a day to day, we must immunize communities against violent ideologies that let them understand. We must let them understand how terrorists operate. We must let them understand their strategic vision and their tactics. We must let communities take it upon themselves to identify gaps within which that are exploited by violent extremists. The strategy we implement that countering violent extremism is a plan of action that rallies communities through networks. We have networks of women, we have male mentorships, We have youth networks, psychological support groups, interfaith groups, and national actors, political or otherwise, that give effect to the meaning of, to the county action plans that every county has in this country to deal with the violent extremism. And this is coordinated with a very wide component of sector called the County Engagement Forum, made up of civil society, the media practitioners, the security actors, community leaders, faith leaders, educators, women, the youth, everyone in the society, into what is not just a critique but a practical exercise of the whole of society approach. It is both sustainable and cost effective. It is important to know that communities have the power to resist violent extremism if they're enlightened and supported and coordinated to be the implementers themselves, and states only standing to empower them to know and to support them in this. So we must let them take up that narrative and support them in driving that effort. But it is also very important to mount social, cultural, and economic rights onto the pedestal on which they belong. There has been a lot of emphasis on civil and political rights. While these are important, they are not the only ones that must reach the zenith for equality of human beings. It is very important that we recognize that human rights are not just the civil and political ones, but that it is the socio-economic rights are also a priority, and that states take effort to make sure that they are also achieved. Emphasis ought to be on human security, recognizing that economic security, food security, health security, environmental security, personal security, community security, freedom from fear and want are actually human rights, and they are a formidable weapon against violent extremism. Thank you.
These social and economic rights have a direct impact on security issues that we have. So that's really, really encouraging, Madam. We are very happy with your remarks, and we will continue to support you and to work with you on preventing and countering violent extremism and make our country safe. The chair of the National Commission on Human Rights, apparently there's a marathon and the streets have been closed already and she's running late. So I have taken the chair's prerogative. Kindly allow me, I have my colleagues who've worked extremely, extremely hard to make this event a success, to quickly just come before we go to our two main speakers to give us a word or two of welcome. I request you please, Dr. Yona Wanjala, to please come from the Civic Advisory Hub very briefly as we move forward, as we also take this opportunity to see if the National Commission on Human Rights. Of course, we'll have a director from Haki Africa, and we'll have my sister from Spaces for Change very briefly, and of course, Rosette Ocho from Vocal Africa.
Other colleagues, our chief guest, Baba Raila Amolo Odinga, friend in the human rights family, none other than Professor Ben. So, a brother from the AU, a sister from the African Commission on Human Rights, Human and People's Rights, our director, City Kenya, and our financial supporter, none other than George Kagoro, and others absent in the House, Ford Foundation, Mod Foundation, and others. Ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to this inaugural activity and event of the Pan-African Conference, organized by a collective of civil society organization, as making and contributing a brick to countering terrorism in Africa. Can you clap for yourselves? Colleagues, this is a key moment to us to contribute in defining African solutions to African problems. It is a statement that sounds right. It's a statement that sounds appealing, but sometimes we ask ourselves exactly what is the African solution to African problems. When we talk about terrorism, sometimes we so much think about kinetic approaches that instead worsen the situation. But I think we also need, in African solution, to yet consider more preventive approaches that go to the root cause of the problems. Our chief guests, we are happy of the strides you are taking, but I think it's the time again to echo that you associate yourself with some of our pleas as part of the main causes of terrorism in Africa, that the world focuses attention, that Africa is a recruitment ground, Africa is a financing ground. The elements of leadership deficit that Africa needs to address, the elements of failed state that Africa needs to address, the elements of kleptocracy, the elements of glorifying authoritarianism. And I think through this, we shall be addressing the core. We are in this as members of the civil society because we believe that fighting terrorism is a right and a responsibility for all. Gone are the days when it used to be left to the uniformed officers. And in this, I welcome all of us to find a solution, to make a contribution for a peaceful Africa. Thank you and have a good time. Key to it, before you leave, you must have at least over 10 friends that you should network with in this particular event. It's one thing to collaborate, but it's key to network. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hussein. Our chief guest, the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, UN Special Rapporteur, Professor Ben Sol, our sister from the NCTC, Dr. Rosalind Nyawira, our sister from the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights on her way, Rosalind Doreen, Dr. Litha Musimi Ogana, Commissioner, African Commission on Human Rights and People's Rights, our brother Christopher Kayoshe from the African Union, our sponsor, Brother George Kigoro from Open Society Foundation, our partners, Civic Advisory Hub, Space for Change and Voice of Community Activists and Leaders of Africa, human rights defenders across the African continent present, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor and privilege to welcome you all to this important conference, whose objectives, if met, will be a milestone in our quest for peace, stability, and sustainable development in our continent. Africa is grappling with insecurity and armed conflicts, presenting a green picture of a continent without hope of attaining peace, stability, and meaningful development. A number of countries struggle to maintain a modicum of peace and stability years after colonialism. We mourn for countries like Sudan, Libya, Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, to name but a few countries that have the potential of being economic giants of the continent, but are retrogressing due to lack of peace and stability in their countries. In the West, failed democracies are being violently replaced by military administrations with the support of the people, depicting a grave loss of trust by citizens of their governments. An analysis of the situation will inform us all that the root cause of this endemic state of hopelessness is failure to uphold human rights. For instance, failure to recognize national diversity and to promote inclusiveness, equality of status, and equity in our operations has led to discrimination in development plans and implementation. Marginalization of communities and minorities in development breeds desperation and a call for emancipation. These metamorphoses to armed conflicts depriving states of peace. Our conviction, as exposed in the preamble to our African Charter on Human Rights and People's Rights, is henceforth essential to pay a particular attention to the right to development, and that civil and political rights cannot be dissociated from economic, social, and cultural rights in their conception as well as universality, and that the satisfaction of economic, social, and cultural rights is a guarantee for the enjoyment of civil and political rights. It is time that we pay economic and social rights of our people, lest we breed resentment, desperation, and anxiety, which are flammable ingredients for conflicts. It is Haki Africa's hope, as well as our partners, and expectation that this conference shall be a catalyst to build a Pan-African movement of human rights defenders who shall engage their respective states in upholding human rights and lead their citizenry in taking their government to account. May the Lord bless this conference. May the Lord bless Africa. Viva!
Viva!
Viva, comrades, viva!
Viva!
Viva Africa!
Viva Africa!
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Echoing the sentiments of Dr. Nyawira on socio-economic rights, and also the sentiments of Yona that we need a Pan-African network, and hopefully moving forward from this conference, then we'll be able to get that. My sister from Spaces for Change, let us hear also from you. She's representing our very good friend, Madam Victoria Ibezimo Hairi, and thank you for partnering with us on this. Karibu.
Your Excellency, retired Honorable Raila, the UN Special Rapporteur, Professor Bensol, and other distinguished members of the high table, and distinguished colleagues as well. Good morning once again. My name is Shola Sam Adeniyi, and I am in Nigeria. I work to support the direction of civics programs at Spaces for Change. And this morning I am giving this speech on behalf of Victoria Ibezimo Hairi, who is the Executive Director of Spaces for Change and who is unavoidably absent. I would like to welcome everyone to this exotic meeting where we are going to be having meaningful conversations that will shape the future of Africa in the fight against terrorism. Spaces for Change